Hey guys, this is Sean, and I'm not going to be talking about politics like I usually do on this channel. For those few of you who watch, I'm going to be talking about something more personal, and I'm going to be doing it because, I feel like I've been looking online for a long time, and I've seen a lot of people who have been going through similar experiences that I've been going through in the past March, April, May, 3 months. It seems like so much longer though, but it's been March, April, May. Yeah, 3 months. So I have health anxiety, and it started off. I've had it for. I thought it went away. But for the past 3 months, I've had it worse than I've had it my entire life. And it started off, I would inspect my mouth in the mirror for, I guess, lumps, and I would inspect it for lumps, and I would inspect it for sores, and not really sores. What's it called? Ulcers and masses and stuff, because I was afraid of mouth cancer, and so that was the initial fear that set in for me. Was 3 months ago when I started looking at my mouth, and I was like, I saw my cheeks, like the lining of my cheeks looked big to me. They looked big to me. And so that's what it started off with. But where it ended up and where it's been was more neurological. And it was MS at first, and a brain tumor. And to where I got an MRI from my neurologist, and my MRI didn't show either of those things. And so I was like, it's always temporary though. With health anxiety, the relief is temporary, because then it goes to, oh well, since this is ruled out, it could be instead this worse thing. And so eventually my concerns migrated to really what I think is the worst disease you can possibly have, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And in my experience worrying about this disease has been hellish. It's been hellish. And it's not. You go back and forth about it. You get. What I've been having is muscle twitches, which, from what I've read online, causes people to have concerns about ALS. Muscle twitches are common, but they are not supposed to be constantly occurring to any one particular individual. The only reason that they would be constantly occurring, or occurring on a regular basis, is a number of diseases, some not a big deal, some a huge deal. And like I said, I'm not a doctor. I didn't say that, but let me say it for the first time, I'm not a doctor. Though I've been to a lot of them in the past 3 months. But with ALS, it's this just final horrible disease. And my heart goes out to anybody who has ALS, who knows somebody who is afflicted with ALS, loves somebody who's afflicted with ALS, knows somebody that has died from ALS, or is somebody who has died from ALS. My heart goes out to those people, because that is, I think, the worst disease you can possibly get. And for those of you who don't know what ALS is, it's a progressive degenerative disease which destroys your muscles and kills you usually within 3 to 5 years, sometimes as long as a decade. In Stephen Hawking's case, he lived about 50 years with it. But that's extremely rare. Most of the time, you're dead within 10 years. So naturally, if you're having muscle twitches and you are feeling fatigued and, you have these symptoms that seem to mimic some of the symptoms of ALS, it freaks you out. And, some people think that's an irrational response. I don't really think it is. I was told constantly, it's all in your head, you're freaking yourself out over nothing. And what I just want to say to people who have gone through a similar experience that I have, which is that, first of all, you're almost definitely fine. But secondly, it's okay to be worried. It's a scary set of symptoms to be experiencing. And no matter how much you tell yourself, oh, well, there's a difference between ALS and, what's called Benign Fasciculation Syndrome, which is what my neurologist has told me I have. Which a lot of the times benign fasciculations are caused by stress, and it's a recurring chronic disease that sometimes goes away and oftentimes and sometimes doesn't. And for me, it's near constant. But we'll get to that in a second. You constantly try to convince yourself, you constantly have an argument with yourself. ALS twitches are different than BFS twitches in this way. BFS twitches are more widespread than ALS twitches, which would start in one place and migrate out. And twitches aren't usually noticed by ALS patients until doctors point them out. Or until the disease has progressed so much that they're basically already completely disabled. You can tell yourself that all day, but you'll still have a voice in the back of your head saying, oh, well, you seem to get really exhausted after you take a walk, so, that's weakness. Oh, your legs don't have as much muscles as your legs don't have as much muscle mass as they should, or your arms don't have as much muscle mass, because muscle wasting is one of the symptoms. And you think, well, me personally, I've never been a muscular dude. I never did sports in high school. I've never really exercised regularly outside of like my freshman year of college. And that's a bad thing, first of all. Secondly, in my case, it makes sense that my muscles aren't super defined. But I can pick up things. I can pick up things. I can crush things. And a person who suffers from BFS will constantly test these things, and there's always going to be something there that they just can't get out of their head. That, oh man, I feel like I should be stronger than this. But it's hard to compare your experience that you're experiencing now with experiences that you didn't even pay attention to in the past. A year ago, I never paid attention to how my grip strength was compared to what it is now. That's not how, because you weren't worried about ALS, or you barely knew anything about ALS. And so my neurologist, I told my neurologist that I've had fasciculations, twitches for years. They just have never been this bad before. And he said, well, if you've had them for years and you're not disabled, then you have benign fasciculation syndrome. And I was like, oh, of course, if I've had them for years, then it makes no sense why I would still be able to walk around and do things and pick up things. But then it's that voice that comes back in and it says, well, have you really had them for years? Are you sure about that? Can you remember specifically, as if you remember every, muscle twitch that you've ever had? And I remember, I know that I've had them for years. I'm just not exactly sure how many years it's been. And that's what frustrates me so much, and so people who have this sort of fear about ALS, it feeds the benign fasciculation syndrome that they have. And so with my condition, it's definitely done that. I'm moving to California in about a month. And I was always looking forward to this moment where I'd move to California because I love California and I've been waiting to move to California for a long time. And this whole thing of this fear of, well, it doesn't matter because you're going to die. It sort of puts a cloud over everything. And I just wish I could get rid of it for good. Now, I've had an EMG. And my EMG, for the most part, was clean. What frustrates me is that I happen to have nerve damage in my leg, but my neurologist says it's from crossing my legs, which is something I do a lot, actually. So it makes sense, and that it's not severe, and that everything else looks fine. But there's some minor nerve damage in my leg, which is so frustrating, like when you're trying to just be, clean EMG, no ALS, you happen to have this other thing. But, I imagine if I had ALS, then I would have clinical weakness. It's actually not about me imagining it. If I had ALS, then I would have clinical weakness. And he tested my reflexes. He tested my strength and found no clinical weakness whatsoever. And so to an outsider, it's so frustrating. Because they're like, why aren't you satisfied? Why don't you... why aren't you satisfied that doctors have told you that you're fine? And the reason is, I think that not because we think we know better than the doctors, but because, it's just a constant what if. What if he's trying to placate me and ALS is so rare that he, thinks that there's no way that a 23-year-old would have it, and so any signs he might have of it are probably some other thing, or he missed something, or he's interpreting my nerve damage in my leg as being from crossing my leg, and when really it's something else. It's all these different arguments that you have in your head that drive you crazy. And, BFS causes so many different things, too. And it actually does cause exercise intolerance in some cases. To where it used to be, I try to take daily walks. I said I don't exercise, but I do that, I do take daily walks. So I like to listen to audiobooks and take a walk and get out. So that's my limited amount of exercise. And I'm so much more drained afterwards than I used to be since I started suffering from BFS. Or at least when my BFS got this bad. And so it's relieving on one hand to find that BFS is associated with exercise intolerance. And what's also interesting to me is I was hanging out with friends the other day, celebrating a friend's birthday, and we were walking around the Grapevine Mall in a very teenager kind of way. A lot of them were actually teenagers, 18, 19, college kids. I don't know why I'm going into unnecessary detail. Anyway, and I walked around like normal. The exercise intolerance actually wasn't present for some reason. Like, I got tired eventually, but it was the kind of tired that a normal person would be after walking around a mall all day. For literally hours, we were walking around a mall, and I didn't feel abnormally fatigued. You know, and I've thought about that, and I've been like, you know, ALS symptoms don't work that way. They don't work to where it's like you're suddenly back up on your feet and you're fine, and then you're not. The reason that I felt fine is because I was with people, I was with friends, and it calmed my anxiety. And I find that consistently, that when I'm with people, when I'm with friends, my BFS symptoms are so much better. They're so much less present. And that's obviously not how ALS works. So I just wanted to make this video to say to anybody suffering with this affliction, first of all, our suffering is nothing compared to the suffering of actual ALS patients. Ours is a different kind of suffering that is in no way comparable. But it is suffering. But the key to beginning to get over it, and I don't want to use get over it in a pejorative fashion, because I know as soon as I turn off this video, it's not going to be gone. My ALS anxiety, my health anxiety about this issue is not going to be gone forever. But I wanted to put my feelings into words, because I feel like that's so much more tangible than just being trapped in your brain and thinking about things. And so if you have had these experiences, if you've had BFS, if you've had concerns about ALS, you've had neurologists tell you you're fine and just not been satisfied by that, I would say to, you know, think about the way your fasciculations, your muscle twitches, your spasms, whatever you want to call them, think about how they work, how they affect your life. Do they go away when you're with friends? Can you pick up objects normally? You know, are they, do they flip between different muscles randomly? Do you have any weakness? Here's another thing, though, that's super frustrating about BFS, is that perceived weakness is a thing, and I had that too. But it was so much worse several weeks ago, which is why, you know, I think that it's definitely an anxiety-caused condition. Perceived weakness, so it's like things feel harder than they should, but ultimately you can still do things. You know, they just feel more straining and more tiring than they should. But that's not the kind of weakness that's with ALS. Clinical weakness is tested by a physician, and when I was tested, I had none of it. And so just think about those things. What I did is that I wrote these things down. I wrote them down and I emailed them to myself. And so what I'm planning to do is just whenever I begin to worry about this issue, I'll just look at all the reasons that it doesn't make any sense, because it's nice to have them all in one place. Just look at all the reasons why this is an anxiety-caused condition, that it wouldn't make any sense that you would have. Like if you had ALS, then your symptoms wouldn't make any sense. And that your symptoms comport perfectly with BFS. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And I don't know if I mentioned this already, but just know that twitches are not are very rarely the first thing that an ALS patient notices. They notice weakness first. For BFS sufferers, it's twitches and then weakness, which comes after because we've freaked ourselves out. And so I just want anyone who's out there suffering, please comment. Feel free to comment in the comment section, naturally. And, you know, tell about your story. And I'd love to hear some of your stories, because every time I read a new one, you know, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that person's talking about. It's a great sense of solace and sort of, there's a great sense of solace there. So yes, please do that. And just know that, you know, unless you have the kind of symptoms that I was talking about that are associated with ALS, that differentiates itself from BFS, then you are going to be fine, and I am going to be fine. And we just have to keep telling ourselves that until we believe it. All right. Well, thanks for watching.